Julian, you're hearing us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. We can. Ouais, c'est ça, on peut commencer.
Go.
Alors, and welcome everyone to this panel on the mobilization of the America left against oligarchy. Welcome also to our panelists, Michael Pelias, Julian Latimore, and Tanya Wajkowski. This meeting is organized as a part of the Great Transition and the World Social Forum of Intersection, in the particular context of the rise of the right in different parts of the world, and especially south of our border. Indeed, since November 5, in the United States, the Trump 2.0 era has redefined the contour of the contemporary radical right. However, sorry for my English, mobilization has continued to grow and organize. Our guests will be here to talk about this here and online. We will have the opportunity to hear from a committed individual who present different perspectives from within the America left. First, Michael Pelias.
You want me to go ahead? No?
But I will introduce you a little bit. The main organizer of the first conference of the American Left in New York in the aftermath of the pandemic, and also president of the Institute for Radical Imagination, will present the ongoing discussion within a new radical committee with a view to holding a unified conference in March 2026. Next, Julian Latimore, campaigner manager for the Rosa Luxembourg Foundation, New York office, will talk about the mobilization of social media. Thank you to be online. You are in? Is it okay for, okay, sorry. And then Tanya Wajkowski, a member of VSA, re-elected to the Vermont Senate on the banner of the Vermont Patriotic Party, founded in particular by Bernie Sanders, will present the perspective of American socialists in the aftermath of Trump's second victory. Est-ce que tout le monde entend bien jusque dans le fond de la salle? C'est bon. OK, parfait. The panelists will speak in English, and the discussion will be conducted in French and in English. So if you want to ask questions and you cannot formulate in English, we can help you after the conversation. We will proceed in 3 rounds of questions to our panelists and conclude the meeting with a period of discussion and questions from the audience. Please save your question for this time. We will conclude the activity at 5:30, but maybe we take a little bit more time. And after that, if you want, you can be with us at the Vigo restaurant for a more informal discussion. Okay, then my first question for the panelists, it's to take a turn introducing themselves and their movement, and it's 3 minutes each. Maybe I can.
3 minutes?
3 minutes, yeah.
I've never been restricted that way, but I'll try my best. Okay.
Mario, can we? Est-ce qu'on peut bouger l'ordinateur?
No,
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm Michael Pelias. I've been active on the left for many years. I was one of the founding members of the journal Situations Project for the Radical Imagination, which still lives today. And and is a theoretical journal. It was an attempt to shake up the left in the United States. And this morphed also into something called the Manifesto for a Left Turn, which was co-authored by Stanley Aronowitz. Some of you probably know who Stanley Aronowitz was, who passed away approximately 3.5 years ago, and Richard Wolff, who is still out actively, on podcasts and runs the Democracy at Work program. So we wrote this manifesto again to shake up people and predicting that Obama would not bring a change, even though many of our friends on the left thought the Obama moment would bring a change. So we did form an institute for the radical imagination, which has been an attempt to build study groups, classes offered. For many years, we started at a place called the Brecht Forum, which is now defunct, unfortunately, in New York City. But it still goes on. We use several university sites for the ongoing classes. And we also offer a Marxist summer school that is taking place on the island of Kossos in Greece. It's a 2-week intensive where we bring people, students from all over the world, as well as faculty from the world, militants, primarily this year from the Italian left, but and some of the English and some of the New York people as well. So that's a little bit of the background. I consider we're planning, and I want to just give a shout out. There are 2 people here in the audience who were very integral for bringing together the first conference of the left in person after COVID. Josh Calvo back here, who was one of the technical people, and Matt Benetti, who is still on the board of the Left Forum, which we're trying to reconstitute through something called the Radical Assembly. And this will begin hopefully in March of next year. We're inviting people from all over the world to come. It's an attempt to bring the left together again in some kind of unified fashion. I'm of the persuasion that there are a lot of leftists in the United States. There are some mobilizations, but there is no left. There's no left really to speak of. And I'm pressed for time now, right? Okay, anyway, I primarily live by the maxim that practice without theory is blind. That unless you have theoretical moments and study alongside of direct action, mobilization, you're basically in for a rude awakening from what's happened on the right. I've studied the right for many years. I go way back into the Reagan years. I certainly paid a price for being a leftist, during that period. That was the first assault, if you will, on Marxists and the academy in a big way, although it was going on much longer before that. Today, I just want to give you a heads up from the States. The universities are completely under attack. Knowledge is completely under attack. You will be benefiting in Canada because everybody wants to leave. The professors of rank, professors of, that are really involved. Some Timothy Snyder from Yale has gone to York University in Toronto. I'm a very well-known historian. Many other people, scientists, want to leave. 60% of those interviewed by Nature magazine want to leave. So this is how bad it's gotten. People are afraid for their families, afraid for what's going on. And there's a lot to speak about this, how the left or the leftists can mobilize against this ongoing assault against any kind of First Amendment rights and what we also in the university call academic freedom. To me, this is one of the biggest moments going on. I know we have some artists here, a filmmaker and other people who are in the arts. Artistic expression is under attack as well, completely. Much worse than it was by the Reagan moment, et cetera. And this is, again, ongoing for a long period of time. So I'll stop here. I mean, I have a tendency, I've known this, the Fidel Castro lecture, I don't stop. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Tu veux
On va le changer.
fonctionner bien?
Ouais.
Yeah, music.
Est-ce que Julianne, do you hear?
Did you hear?
Yeah, I can hear.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, perfect. If you have problems, just take it.
Oh, wait.
We can hear now Tanya. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. So I'm Tanya Vyhovsky. I am a state senator in Vermont, and I am the only out socialist in the Vermont State Senate. I certainly have some colleagues who sometimes share leftist views, but they're not willing to lead with them, which is part of the problem. You know, one of the things that I've certainly seen in the Senate in this past since November 5th is a real hesitancy to act, a hesitancy to be an opposition party, a hesitancy to do anything. But I cut my teeth actually organizing on the Healthcare is a Human Right campaign after college. And eventually what I saw is that we would have mobilization and we would gain little things, but they would never be implemented, and eventually led me for a variety of reasons to run for office and be on the inside trying to both implement the things that my comrades on the outside were fighting for, but also to open the door for them. One of the things I've seen so much is that the political spaces are so privileged. We use funny rules and a funny language that really keeps people out. And so one of the things that has been really critically important to me is really opening that door and bringing people with me, not just fighting from inside for them, but fighting with them. So I really bring an organizing lens to the work that I do. When I am not in the Senate, I'm a clinical social worker, and I grew up in a working class, single parent home. So what I saw regularly looking to the positions, you know, people in positions of power, they weren't fighting for me. They didn't represent me. They didn't represent families like mine. You know, I'm a first generation American on my dad's side of the family. And what brought me to running for office actually was a moment with Bernie Sanders in the basement of a church on Labor Day, when he told me that he'd heard I was thinking about running for office. And I told him, you know, I wasn't sure, that's not really for me. Those aren't my people. I'm not represented there. And he put his arm around my shoulder and he said, you know, the fact that you don't see yourself represented there is why we need you there, not a reason not to run. And so as soon as the town offices opened the next day, I filed my paperwork. I ran, I lost. But I ran again and I won in 2020 and have served one term in the House and am now starting my second term in the Senate. Really looking to bring a different way of co-governance rather than simply top-down governance. So I look at the ways that I can mobilize my Senate colleagues and the ways that I can work both inside and outside to bring the movement into the government spaces. So that I think is enough for an introduction. And I'm looking forward to being here with all of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tanya. And now we can hear I just want to say, if you hear a voice from them, it's the translation in French. Yeah, Spanish, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Now we can hear Julianne from the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. You are in New York, huh, now?
Yeah, correct. So if you hear any like background noise, that's the New York
Can
City.
you speak more loud? Loudly?
Yeah. Yeah, so if you hear any background noise, that might be the New York City streets. But yes, I'm here in New York City. My name is Julian Lattimore. I'm with the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung.
Wait. Do you understand? Yeah.
Can you speak just a little bit more slowly also?
Sure.
Can I understand it? But I don't know how to. Okay.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll slow it down for the interpreters. Apologies. My name is Julian Lattimore. I'm with the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, and Stiftung is just the German word for essentially foundation. I am located in Brooklyn, New York. The Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung has offices all around the world, in Europe and the global South. Is everything okay? Can you hear?
Yeah, I'm seeing if they have a sound. Le son est au maximum.
Je sais pas, c'est changé. Il était haut. Il était dans tous les mais maintenant c'est.
Vous entendez assez? Ok, c'est bon. C'est bon. Ok. Non, c'est correct quand il va.
Okay.
So you can go. Sorry.
Okay, so we have offices. The Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung has offices all around the world. So we are located in, I think, about 16 different countries at this time. And all of these local offices are sort of headquartered by our Berlin office. These Stiftungen or foundations are part of the German government system. So each party that makes the federal government in Germany, the Bundestag, with at least 5%, will have the opportunity to create an organization that can pretty much relay the party's principles and foundational issues on a global scale. So we at the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung are a part of Die Linke, the left party in Germany. I joined RLS, the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, in 2022, so coming up on 3 years now. And a lot of what we do is supporting different social movements in New York City, as well as Canada and a little bit of Puerto Rico as well. That's the mandate of our office in pretty much in North America, except for Mexico and parts of the Caribbean. So we work with different groups, organizations, many of whom are very small and pretty dependent upon our support to do their programmatic work, whether that be putting on different events and educational opportunities, or even traveling to the New York area in the United Nations to deliver a speech on the UN floor. So we do a lot of different work locally and at the UN level to support progressive social movements in their issues and their fights.
Thank you, Julian. And I will ask the second question to the panelists, but just before I want just to introduce me. And in the beginning, I don't say because I was a little bit mélangée. But I'm Marie-Josée Béliveau from le comité Action politique de Québec solidaire sur les questions d'altermondialisme et de solidarité internationale. Il y a quelques personnes d'ailleurs qui font partie du comité ici, qui sont là, dont Santiago qui est pas très loin ici. Donc, c'est vraiment un honneur pour moi d'animer la conférence aujourd'hui. Ceci dit, vous avez peut-être remarqué, mon anglais n'est pas parfait, je suis désolée. C'est ma 3e langue, puis j'ai encore besoin de la pratiquer. Alors, voilà, donc c'était juste pour m'introduire. Merci. Alors, we will pursue with the second question. They have 5 minutes each to respond. I will then invite the panelists to go into a little more detail about their movement, the reaction to the current context with the Trump administration, and the perspective they propose to develop. And you have 5 minutes each. Do you want to begin, Tanya?
She's in the thick of it. Yeah, a little distance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly Vermont has seen, and the United States across the board has seen just an incredible uptick in authoritarian responses and authoritarian mechanisms of engagement. You know, just 2 nights ago, 10 migrant workers were snatched off a farm in the northern part of Vermont and taken to prison because our state prison system is cooperating with ICE and holding detainees. We've had some pretty high profile cases in Vermont. Mosin Madawi was given a call to come in for his final immigration hearing, and he was arrested at that hearing. Thankfully, we were able to keep him in Vermont and get him out. He is free. He is able to be with his community and his family in southern Vermont. And so Vermont has seen a lot of uptick in immigration and customs enforcement, and frankly, the state sanctioned trafficking of people across borders to avoid due process. It's been challenging, you know, as I said before, there's been some lack of pushback, some lack of, frankly, the spine to stand up for what is right. And I've spent much of my legislative session trying to get people to take it seriously. And there was this sense in Vermont, particularly, that can't happen here. No matter how many times I said to people, it's not that it cannot happen here, it's when it will happen here. And it's actually already happening. And so it's been difficult, frankly, as a leftist and as someone who grew up talking at the dinner table about what authoritarian regimes looked like. My grandmother left Hungary in 1956, and my dad was born in Ukraine when it was part of the USSR. and perhaps this means I'm more attuned to what authoritarianism looks like than many of my colleagues and many of my neighbors, but it's been frustrating to have this sort of sense of denial that that is what is happening. And it's not only happening in the United States, it's really a global movement. And I look at what's happening to my family who still lives in Ukraine. I look at what's happening to my family that lives in Hungary, and I look at that sort of rise of authoritarianism across the world. And what I know is that those fascists and authoritarians are connected across the globe. Certainly they will sell each other out when it's convenient for them, but they are connected. And what I have come to believe over the course of the past decade, really, but certainly now, is that we leftists have to be connected across the globe as well, standing in international solidarity with each other, recognizing that what happens in Palestine, what happens in Ukraine, what happens in Hungary is actually happening to all of us, and that we have a commitment to one another. And I have my small piece in the Senate where I am fighting for the rights of people who may have different life experiences than mine, but it's critically important that we're fighting for that. And I think it's critically important too for us to recognize, and certainly it's a message that I send often, is that the structure isn't made for that. The structure is actually made to uphold power. And so there's a real pushback within the structure that says it wants to stand for human rights and liberation, but it really doesn't and never has. And so that to me is where a lot of the challenge has been, is mobilizing that very cumbersome structure. And to the point that you made earlier, there are a lot of leftists, but we're not united the way that we need to be, not in Vermont, not in the United States, and certainly not across the globe. And it is a critical moment in time. I truly believe if we are going to defeat global authoritarianism, it will be with international working class solidarity. It will be with a real movement that centers the rights of those who historically have been ignored, or worse, intentionally oppressed, and moves to lift us all up across the world. And the Vermont Senate and the Vermont State House has been profoundly disappointing. We regularly like to think of ourselves in Vermont as very progressive, as very human rights focused. But when things have gotten really difficult, what I have found is actually they are going to double down and protect their power. And it has been not, I can't say terribly surprising, but incredibly disappointing nonetheless. But I think it's really important that we're standing up, we're speaking out, we're using the privilege we have, the spaces of power we might have to draw hard lines in the sand and to say the hard things. I certainly didn't ever expect that there would be a day that I would be sitting in committee that is being live streamed to all of Vermont and have to look at one of my colleagues and say, you know what, I don't think the Germans expected their neighbors to get rounded up, but here we are. That's what's happening. And so I think we have to look to history at what has happened and recognize the parallels to that, and stand up a stronger fight back, so that we don't just go back to a status quo where people in positions of power and privilege didn't have to look at the suffering, but we actually work to alleviate it.
Thank you.
Should I go?
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to start on, I guess, on a more historically pessimistic note, even though I'm a firm believer in Romain Rolland's great phrase that Antonio Gramsci took up: we must have pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. So, but what we're witnessing today is, in my opinion, about a 40 to 45 year program that has been very well articulated, extremely well organized. The left has been asleep about the density and the ability of the new right, if you will, and the hard right to mobilize for this period of time. We live in a complete corporate welfare state. The New Deal, of which Bernie Sanders, the senator from Vermont, is probably the last vestige of a representative of the New Deal, and some of the principles there, has been completely overthrown and is constantly under attack, including people in the United States' Social Security, Medicare, and now Medicaid, of which 7 to 10 million people will lose their health care. So, I mean, the news is bad. you know, to put it mildly. And we could sit here for the next 2 years listing the symptoms of this new right thing. The question to me again is, are we going to, in a way, I don't think Trump is 2.0. I think it's still 1.0, that he really never left office. We really did not have any change with the Biden administration. In fact, the Democratic Party set up Donald Trump's return. They should be really held accountable for this and have not stood up for anything. This is why someone like Tanya should be highly, highly complimented and really give all support in her struggle, because she's one of very few that are actually stepping up against this oppressive Democratic Party. You know, the party of war, the party of, you know, of basically pushbacks, you know, betrayal of the working class. So I practice most of my practice is in the classroom. I teach philosophy, I teach political philosophy, and I try to introduce my students to the work of Marx. I try to introduce them to many other, you know, progressive thinkers in the history of ideas. And, you know, the students are very open. They want change. And I see here we have some people under 40, which is nice to see, of course, but they're open to change, but they really have nowhere to go. This is the problem in the United States. We don't have a political formation. We don't have a political formation. And I think this really has to be the discussion. I'm of the ilk, I'm an old battle scarred, very long time, if you will, on the left, in a sense. And I personally don't believe in reformism. I believe in revolutionary reforms, but not reformism. This is not going to get us anywhere. And really, to go back to, since we have a Julian from the Rosa Luxemburg, it's either revolution or reform. And really, in a way, we should be really building revolutionary consciousness and revolutionary ideas. There's no really middle ground at this point, and compromise. And also, I think you forgot to mention, but this was a horror in Vermont, what happened to the Palestinian person earlier. I forgot his name. He was assaulted, you know, and the one that there was an attack, right?
There were three Palestinians.
3 Palestinians
in
shot.
Burlington.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So, you know, this is another thing that we're witnessing here. We had this after 9/11. You know, we used to go in Brooklyn, one of our moments where we would escort, you know, Muslim women to go shopping because we were afraid what would happen to them after 9/11. So the United States is very good and very expert at creating the other as enemy, right? It's China now, of course, because of, you know, you can say, is it socialism with Chinese characteristics? But again, China is the new enemy on the block, as we well know, in the big sense. But at the same time, it's always the other. Right now, it is the Muslim other. And I think there needs to be, of course, a discussion, and this is the main idea out there today, and very disappointing to me, even DSA on Palestine, that this is the central question of our time, at least internationally, of what's going on with human rights. And we're witnessing, in my lifetime, I saw the Vietnam War. I did not go to Vietnam, but I was very much part of anti-war movements. But this is live genocide. I mean, let's just face facts and what's going on. And very, very few people, you know, have really mobilized again. We see it at commencement things, but in general, we're asleep in the United States. And we really need this kind of, again, revolutionary awakening. Yeah, so I'll stop there. Like I said, I go on too long.
Thank you.
We'll go to Julie.
Thank you so much. Julianne, can you
Yeah, sure. I think I was actually thinking about this
Recording in progress.
last night. I was realizing that, like, essentially during the time of like Jim Crow, it seemed like you could actually make the argument that you saw more states fighting back against federal government in that respect than you're seeing right now under this current administration. So just the people, representatives like Tanya are exceptionally important to having some sort of a fight in politics at this time. So I don't think RLS, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oui.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think RLS can actually technically by our funding rules actually work directly with politicians. So a lot of what we do, especially in the context of social media, is actually interesting that that's like the sort of lens that I'm discussing this through because as we know, social media is not some sort of
Oups, excusez.
You lost the
Ah.
voice.
Continue.
Non, c'est quand, OK.
No, we lost his voice.
OK.
Hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry.
No problem. Yeah, I don't think social media can actually it's just a tool. That's the way I think our office approaches it. I think that's the way the left should approach it. And that right now this tool is actually owned and essentially operated by a billionaire or multiple billionaires, depends on what platform you want to talk about. With respect to China, for example, it seemed like the one platform that had a real I wouldn't necessarily call it revolutionary, but it was a very sort of, I would say, younger skewed content that actually had a lot more, I guess what we would call news that you wouldn't see on the news. You saw the attack against this particular social media platform, TikTok. I believe because of the content that you could see there, but you really couldn't see if you turned on the news or looked at a newspaper. So I think our office we use social media more to get the word out. It's more as a messaging tool to our audience about our events and our content that we are putting on. It's something that I think everybody should look at their usage and really question if this is the best use of their organizing or if they could just maybe use this as a small piece of their organizing and pivot more towards in-person things and events that or gatherings that are really connecting with people in a way that can't be manipulated by an algorithm. So I think that's just like a thought on the social media aspect. I think a lot of the work that Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung does is actually unchanged by the administration. It's not necessarily like the fight for indigenous rights isn't necessarily significantly more difficult under the previous administration than it might be at this time under this current administration. It's still a lot of groundwork that needs to be done. So like that's just one area that we work in. Another area, for example, is reparations. So this year actually marked the 200th anniversary of Haiti having to pay reparations to France. So part of what our office's mandate is able to do is bring people from the Haitian diaspora to the UN for this event, sort of marking this 200th anniversary, and basically speak their truth to what they've endured as Haitian nationals, what Haitian nationals have to go through with respect to immigration. That really under Biden, I don't know if anybody had seen the photos of Haitian migrants being whipped. So the new administration is obviously awful. It's not something that's like easy to operate under, but I think a lot of the work that we try and do is unchanged by a harsher administration and a more difficult climate to organize. And I think we continue to sort of support the organizations that we support. I think a lot of the organizations that we do provide support for actually didn't have much federal funding for any of their programmatic work or their initiatives. So it's really imperative that we continue to do the same things that we had been doing since our office opened in 2012 under Obama. But yeah, I think ultimately with the question of social media in particular, I think it's something that we've seen definitely change. Obviously, if anybody's been on Twitter or X, formerly known as Twitter, I still call it Twitter. You can see the market change in the content and the way that content is fed to you. So this is something that I think all people who consider themselves leftist should sort of realize when they're interacting with social media, that this is not some sort of free-form tool. And that capital has ways of basically using this against you. Even a lot of these the pro-Palestinian protesters and organizers are being targeted through social media and bad actors on social media that utilize social media to sort of pick their targets, so to speak. So again, it's just a tool. It has no inherent good to any group of people unless you're the owner of that tool, which is currently the oligarchy. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Julian. Okay, to conclude the panelist presentation, it will be interesting to hear their vision for the future, the battle against the oligarchy, and in particular, the alliance of new alliance emerging on the left. How we can build together in the context of this radical right in the United States and the world. They have 5 minutes each, and we can begin with Michael.
Okay. Well, I don't have any solutions, so I want to say that. First of all, I wish I did. I wish I had the magic bullets to go forward. I again, am the school that we really need to study. We need to understand where we are. This takes hard work. This is the movement of both ideas into practice, into everyday life. And you have to live these ideas in a regular way if you're going to make any kind of dent in the machine. It does not happen through electoral politics, with all due respect to the Vermont State Senate and the senators from Vermont. It does not happen, again, through social media. We've seen many examples of this because, you know, I'm part of a group that now is trying to write a book on the archaeology of the failures on the left, and what we've learned from this, how we begin to engage this. The Occupy showed great promise, but ultimately, what was its real function? It got Obama elected to the second term in some ways, maybe raised a little bit of consciousness, but dissipated in many senses. The same thing, of course, Tahrir Square, the Arab Spring, many other movements that we see on social media. Again, I really think we need to create study groups. We need to create a kind of concentric circle where ideas are really shared. And we have great masters of the past. We have an incredible legacy on the left. Marx, right, to begin with, Engels, of course, many other people, if you want to take in the anarchist traditions of Kropotkin, Bakunin. You know, even though these were not always nice people, they actually had an incredible amount of thinking that went on. And of course, on the practical level, I still hold to, you know, Lenin, what he pulled off with his, you know, the Bolsheviks in 1917 was quite a feat, at least for the international working class. And, you know, so again, the question of political organization is crucial. We have all these subgroups like with Solidaire, DSA in the United States, et cetera. But again, we don't have really a vanguard that is really putting out the ideas and where there's this communication going back and forth. And again, we need to begin locally. You know, I live in Brooklyn. It's almost 4 million people. And Brooklyn's the second largest populated city in the United States. We have little neighborhood, you know, coalitions at times, people that are like-minded, but no political organizations, again, that's going on. For example, there's a group of that put together some money for women coming out of prison, an educational moment, right? But it's very isolated, and they don't want to branch out into more, right? In a sense, so we get these pockets, if you will, of resistance. So I think we have to go well beyond this. So one idea that we have going forward is to build this radical assembly that we're going to do next year and start to try to bring people together. Yeah, and we invite you, Tanya, to be one of our speakers, of course, you know, there, and bringing people from all over the world, like the Left Forum used to do. The Left Forum would have as many as 5,000 people from all over the world, including, you know, Walden Bello from the Philippines, including Anuradha Roy, Noam Chomsky, et cetera, over the years. And this is something we need to reconstitute, but with a different moment. We also need, you know, we see here how the technology is, you know, with the way we are. We need to start thinking about to become more sophisticated here. I mean, you know, remember the right has control of technology. And one thing people are not speaking about, oligarchy. The oligarchy is really a right-wing Silicon Valley, you know, moment. This is a mathematical thing. When you really think about this, the Mercer families, Simons of Renaissance Technologies, all the way. Trump is just a creature of, you know, he's a front man. He's the apprentice. if you will, still. He's really a front man. He's good, he's a good go-to person for most of the, what passes for, you know, you can't fix stupid. He plays to that in the United States. He plays to this kind of mentality all the time. But behind this is really something very, very strikingly difficult to confront, et cetera, and how this has been orchestrated for many years. So we need people that are sophisticated on this. You know, I do a lot of work. I'm teaching a course now on building a community of care, you know, where we consider care as a possibility higher than the actuality. And that care becomes something known as real power, not as just power. And I think you've done some care work after COVID. You know, and by the way, our group wrote a book, a very good pamphlet, I think, manifesto called Revolution in the Virus Scene, which is, you know, we did it post-COVID with principles of transformation. So again, I want to emphasize, and you know, I'm all for you know, protest, but protest is never enough. You know, this is something we really have to build concrete organizations internally. And I mean, this is very difficult at this point. You know, we need to build upon each other's strengths too. The problem with the left, everybody, listen, I can identify everybody's line. I've been around a long time. I've read, you know, a lot. You know, but I think we're beyond that now. You know, we need to say, let's collaborate. Okay, you may be, you know, a reformist, right? But are there revolutionary reformists involved in it? You know, what does it mean, these kind of principles? So we really, again, need this kind of dialogue. We need dialogue. We need alternative education sites. That's something that I'm very much involved in. We need, in some ways, we may need a left charter school. Since charter schools, you know, that the right have their own charter schools, which is, you know, or whatever. However, we get educational institutions because we need. And speaking to which, and I'll pass it to here. Goddard College was a great example in Vermont of an alternative learning experience, right? The right assaulted it for a very long period, but it was something that was there. Antioch in Ohio. We had these alternative institutions that are now being completely shelved or dismantled, right? So again, I think this is very important. Gathering places as well as the educational place, right? Yeah, okay, so thank you.
Thank you. Maybe you can, yeah. Julian, can you?
Sure. Yeah,
Please.
just to piggyback off of what Michael said, I think probably my favorite project at the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung at this current moment that I'm working on is called Organizing for Power. And this is a global program, a workshop that is offered online to groups. These groups are there can be workers, union members, workers who want to start their union or learn how to organize, tenants organizations, all sorts of climate organizers, any sort of person who wants to learn how to organize can take this program. And it's something that we offer with our partner Organizing for Power as a sort of tool, a set of tools for potential organizers to learn how to build power within their structures. So one of the things that they learn how to do is identify the structure that they're in. So it's very easy for a worker to identify their structure, it's their workplace, and then learning how to identify leaders within that space to sort of advance their agenda and whatever their campaign might be. So this is a program that's offered, again, all around the world via Zoom. We use social media to help advertise this program. It's run primarily through with my colleagues at Organizing for Power, Ethan and Sarah and Nadia. And essentially, this is offered in 2 different time zones. One in mostly for European and Asian time zone, and the other for sort of Western Hemisphere time zone for North America, Latin America, and Indonesia as well. So we have, I think, 10,000 participants that have come through and about throughout the entire program this last spring. Again, it's offered in all of their languages. I think it's 8 different languages: Turkish, Bahasan, Spanish, Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, French, German, Dutch. It's really I think our are sort of the one program that we're working on or with our partner to sort of try to build some sort of power on the left. And like I said, this is it's a program that you have to go through with a group of at least 10 people. So it's really teaches you to go through that initial stage of sort of identifying people who might be also interested within your local cohort or your building, your workspace, at learning how to organize as well. And then again, learning how to build a supermajority within whatever your structure that you're working within. And this is all built off the principles of Jane McAlevey, who passed away last year, a famous organizer from the United States, labor organizer. And I was also able to actually attend the strike conference in Berlin at the beginning of this month. So it was really cool. The 1st of Mai is a big demonstration day in Berlin. And one of the things that I quickly realized at this demonstration, and after hearing about the history of it, is that it's a heavily police demonstration. So it sort of reminded me of being here in New York. The NYPD knows how to deal with protests. And I think all around the world, but specifically in North America, protest is something that is almost it's almost a tool that's been defiled and sort of defanged to the point of not being able to necessarily accomplish an ends to a mean, but it is still useful for that show of force, show of how many people are behind a particular movement. So in the 1st of May, there's this huge demonstration. Police from all around Germany came to sort of monitor and I wouldn't say lead the demonstration, but sort of escort it through a predetermined route. So you see how the state has essentially made protest a very sort of maybe state friendly is the best way to put it, way to voice an opinion, or state sanctioned way to voice an opinion. But then the actual conference began in the weekend after, and we got to hear from a lot of different German unions, as well as some different representatives that RLS was able to send to Germany to discuss their labor movements here in the United States. So UAW 9A President Brandon Mancia was there, and we were able to support Keith Brower Brown from Labor Notes to also attend, and he was able to basically conduct a couple of workshops, one even in German. And the central theme, I think, of this conference, not to sort of go against revolution, but what it was actually reform, and how to reform labor unions as a tool to advance power. Because I think this is maybe one of the ways that's growing fastest in the United States, and maybe even around the world, is the growth of unions. And I think more union density and union power to actually fight capital and sort of extract leverage through people power and the necessary workers needed to make capital flow. I think that's one of the central ways that the left can actually build power that doesn't actually require social media or anything like that. It's actually word of mouth and actually showing up to workshops, learning how to organize, speaking with your colleagues about issues that you all care about. So I think that's like how RLS has sort of tried to push forward a future which the left has more power and is able to maybe combat oligarchy and all of these capitalistic forces that sort of we all are forced to live under in a way that's more humane and has maybe our own interests in mind. And the only way to do that is to extract as much leverage as possible through as many people as possible who know how to organize and are organized and then mobilized. So thank you.
Thank you. Now, with you, Tanya.
Yes, thank you. And certainly also don't have the answer. However, I agree with you fully, Julian, that labor unions are really key, can be a really key piece. You know, one of the mechanisms by which we can push back is by withholding labor. You know, the workers hold action, they are the economy. There is no capitalism without the workers. And so but one of the critical problems is the decrease in union density and the decrease in sort of militant unions. A lot of our unions, I see it in Vermont. Vermont has a slightly higher union density than the rest of the national average. I think we're about 14 or 15%. Whereas I think the national average is closer to 11. But a lot of our unions, I mean, we're right now, part of the reason I was in the Senate until 1 o'clock in the morning last night was because Democrats are trying to push forward bills that will further privatize education. And our teachers union has been largely silent. And so it's not just getting people to sign a card and join a union, it's creating unions that are going to fight back, that are going to withhold labor, that are going to say, actually, no, if you're going to privatize our schools, we're not teaching, we're going on strike. Actually, no, if you're going to privatize the railroads, we're going on strike. Because I think that's the only way we speak to people who are so incredibly greedy that they've hoarded so much money that one individual could end world hunger, is by withholding that. They don't make money if we don't work. And so I think labor unions are a critical piece of organizing a revolutionary pushback within the structure that we have, because the structure that we have is not by accident, it's by design. It has created a system in the United States of economic apartheid, where people can be divided up and you have one group of people that is working class. They're barely getting by, but they have been taught the person getting food stamps is the enemy, that is why they can't get by. They have taught that the person fleeing war in a land where we created the war is the enemy. And so I think part of how we create that unity is again, by breaking down those barriers and recognizing that all of us, if we don't own the capital, are in fact what is driving that system, and we have the power together to withhold that. We have the power together to say no more. And so labor unions are a critical aspect. I fully agree. We're not saving, electoral politics is not saving us. It was set up to withhold this system. The foundation is rotten. And a lot of the work that is happening in those spaces, as far as I am considering as from electoral, is harm reduction. It's within the system. You know, I mean, I put forward a bill this year that would have made it so you can't charge interest on medical debt. Medical debt shouldn't exist. And I know that, but it's harm reduction in this moment, because in the moment we're in, medical debt does exist. And it's the single greatest driver of bankruptcy in the United States. So what can I do to keep someone who has cancer from losing their home? I can cap interest and make it so you can't collect on medical debt. But in the meantime, we have to be doing the inside outside organizing to break down the barriers between us to fight back against the real problem. And it's not Republicans, it's Democrats alike. I was in Brussels speaking at an international solidarity conference back in March, and I may not be the first person to use this term, but in my speech, I sort of said the term, the rainbow oligarchs are not going to save us. The Democratic Party, they are oligarchs too. They put a pretty face on it, and they believe that we shouldn't let LGBTQ people die, but they don't care if they starve to death. They don't care if they can't get their healthcare needs met. And so I think we have to like pull that mask off. You know, in the 2020 election, I remember as it was unfolding, and you know, Democrats had big wins in Vermont and Joe Biden ultimately won. And I remember looking at one of my friends saying, I don't know why we're celebrating. We have not put the brakes on the catapult towards fascism. We've eased off the gas a little, but if the fundamental material well-being of the majority of people doesn't change, then next Donald Trump will be worse, because that they are able to weaponize the despair that is created in this structure, and they are able to just keep growing it. It's not getting better. And I naively believed as COVID happened and the United States leaned into some tiny level of socialist support, that maybe people would see how good it was to just get a check from the government. Maybe people would see how good it was to have access with expanded Medicaid access to healthcare. Maybe people would understand why healthcare shouldn't be attached to their job as people were losing their jobs. But what I saw was the opposite, was this more concerted pushback from Democrats and Republicans alike to go back to the status quo, to put the mask back on. And in the first Trump presidency, we saw some of those Democrats come out and fight against children in concentration camps on our border. But those concentration camps didn't go away under the Biden administration, but what did go away was the concerted push against it. But they didn't have to look at it anymore, which is why I say that whatever we're fighting for, and I think it takes all of us, I think it takes the labor unions, I think it takes those of us in those positions that are willing to break down those positions and say out loud to the people in power, because I have a platform to do it, that the structures are not broken. They're working exactly the way they were intended to work. They are rotten, but they are not broken. And so we need a new one. We need the revolutionary change. We can't tinker around the edges. If the foundation is rotten, we can replace the windows year after year after year, but they're going to keep breaking because the foundation is still broken. We have to build something different. We have to transform those systems to be centered in taking care of people. When I am asked what I think government is for, it is to meet the basic needs of every individual and to make sure we don't harm each other. Outside of that, do what you want. And that's so contrary to the narrative that has been set around what it means to be a leftist, what it means to be a socialist, what it means to fight for the common good. And we have to counter that. And that's going to take education, and that's going to take labor unions and organizing, and ultimately it's going to take community. And I think one of the ways that I see this erosion is the erosion in community. We don't know our neighbors. We live in a city of 4 million people, and maybe our building knows each other. We have to make the time to connect and remember that we are all in this together. It's a really hard fight in front of us, and we're only going to win if we're in it together. And I think we also have to recognize the economic realities of many people who are leftists or would be leftists, but might have voted for Donald Trump, is that 60% of Americans can't afford a surprise $500 bill. They don't have time to go take philosophy classes. They don't have time to show up at a protest. And so we also have to think about how we're creating the mutual aid that our government isn't, to make it so people can show up. Because I also think that's how we bring people to our movement, is we show them that we care about them. Because we do, because we are in this together. Again, I don't have the answer, but I think I'm going to end on that because it is slightly hopeful.
Thank you to all of
Talking about labor unions, so just for a second.
Yeah.
Just to put it into a context, the UAW, new leadership is planning a general strike. But the problem is the general strike is 3 years away or 2 years away. This is the stupidity, ultimately, in my opinion, of the American left, or the wannabe left. Why are you waiting? What are we waiting for? A new Democratic president who's going to take Donald Trump's position, or J.D. Vance to be put into the presidency, who is, by the way, much more dangerous than Donald Trump, to put it mildly. And so really this is an issue. And also going back to the Democratic Party, why, again, to put one's chips in with the Democratic Party and think you're going to get anywhere. Remember, their biggest donors are Google. You have this split in Silicon Valley, huge donors from Silicon Valley, again, and Silicon Alley in New York, huge donor classes in a sense. And the old slogan, you probably know this, is the bosses have two parties, we have none, right? This is really the game, right here in the electoral vote. Yeah.
Today, in the United States, today's Democratic Party on economic policy is further to the right than Ronald Reagan. And every time they lose, further to the right, which has allowed authoritarians to take control.
The discourse has completely changed since 1980. No longer is there a left discourse in dominant culture.
There is no left in the United States.
Right, there we go. Okay.
About the strike, I want to raise the issue. I understand that there is a lot of leniency, but we will see in the future what union could do. But on the other hand,
This is the United Auto Workers, and basically they're not bringing back automobile production in the United States. I mean, it's not happening, right? It's platform everywhere. I mean, this is insanity, this whole tariff thing, in a sense, to really think about this. How many people that are young working class people who can't wait to get a job in an automobile plant in this generation? Give me a break. The automobile production has been outsourced. It's put out there. It's for South Korea, Mexico, et cetera, where it's been for a very long time. How can you bring it back? And how do you bring it back in terms of where Ford Motor Company and General Motors are willing to pay union wages? That's another thing too, which is a very important part of this too. And why you wait for a strike? You say, oh, we're planning it, we're going to make a big event. I mean, why wouldn't you just do a general strike? I mean, the general strike, was the big weapon that labor had since Sorrel in the middle and late 19th century. So this is, something else. And another thing too is in the unions, everybody is into contract bargaining, collective bargaining agreements. Again, this favors management completely. The game has been stopped. Again, where are the lawbreakers? That's really the issue, to my mind. Where are the people that are actually going to break the law? People don't understand that the American Communist Party, for example, in the 1930s, when they would go to foreclose, the Communist Party would send people with shotguns to sit on the porches of the people that would have their property foreclosed. We don't have any of the movements like that. We don't have a bank. Another thing that Marx and Lenin both warned us about in terms of the Paris Commune when they began to criticize it. There's never been a left bank. There have been proposals. Ellen Brown, I don't know if you know her work, Web of Debt, and she has many proposals about a public banking system, but we don't even consider this anymore, because people want to know. Just think in Vermont, if she goes, how she could become senator to the United States easily if she had, some people to go out and say, something, we've got money from the bank, 0 interest to keep your home intact. Right? This is what people want to hear. And this is what Trump, honestly, and the right has been good at. It hits viscerally, even though it never delivers, but it's always hitting at a visceral level. Anyway, I mean, that's I come from New Orleans, from Louisiana, oil place, one of the most corrupt states in the world, with all power to Zachary Richard, has a big audience here in Quebec. But anyway, we understand these things. The people, just put some meat on the table for it. Just do this. And, the war is an economic war. This is really, again, something we have to think about, which goes along with the psychological war. Anyway.
Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah,
Ronan,
sorry to rip
yeah,
on you,
because
yeah.
we will now open the discussion with all of the person here, the audience. I would ask those who wish to speak to briefly introduce themselves before speaking and to keep their question inside of 2 minutes maximum. And if you can ask loudly. I see your hands.
My name is Nadine Jamar. Teacher.
Just 1 minute. Julianne, do you hear the person
No.
of the?
Not really, but maybe if someone types the question in the chat, I can also then just read it.
Or maybe if you
Would
come.
you like to come up here?
Yeah, if you come here, I
The
can.
microphone. You're a teacher, you should.
Yeah,
be able to.
I'm working for the teacher of the cultural diversity. Trying to.
Wait, maybe because he don't hear you.
Okay, I'm teaching to social workers
Yeah, okay.
mainly,
Okay.
and try to bring consciousness to the students what is to work with people of different culture. The question that I'm asking myself, why do the poor people in the United States vote for a right president? And a president who will say when he was candidate that he will push out the Latin American out of the country, and they voted for him. Part of the Latin Americans voted for him. So I don't understand.
Well, if I could go back in history for a second, you could frame the question, why did the German working class vote for Adolf Hitler?
Yeah,
Right, I
well,
mean, it's the same question in a way. Why is it that fascism
yes,
appeals
yes,
at a
yes.
very deep level? Why do people desire, it's a very strange question, but it's an ethical question in philosophy. Why do people desire their slavery rather than their freedom? How is this indoctrinated for so long, in people psychologically, economically, et cetera, that somehow they feel responsible and then they wait for the savior to come or to speak to them this way. This is a very deep, I mean, you raise a very deep question, at least to me, that's very, very hard to answer directly. You know, it's multi-layered. Yeah.
Mainly, it's not, is it a question of delocalization of jobs? You mean, I mean, it's much more, easy to, big enterprises to hire, immigrant, without paper.
Yes.
Will do the same job as an American with paper for cheaper,
Yes,
Mhm. Yes,
yes.
and we didn't, the leftist people didn't address those issues. So the voters voted for the right.
We'll hear from
Yeah.
the government.
I think practically, despair is easy to weaponize. And I think that the structure that we have created has made it so many people are in despair, they don't see a future for themselves. They can't put food on their tables. They can't afford their rent. They're worried they'll go bankrupt if they get sick. And the way that the right has done an excellent job, not just in this election cycle, but really for 40, 50,
Yeah.
possibly the whole history
Mhm.
of our structure of government, is they weapon and they say it's their fault that you're suffering, or it's their fault that you're suffering, which allows them to divide us up and allows them to trick people into voting against their own interests. Furthermore, I think where part of the failing is in the United States, and I think with the neoliberal left around the world, is that they haven't responded to that despair. You know, when I watched people saying, I can't afford to put food on my table, and Donald Trump says, well, it's their fault you can't put food on your table, and Kamala Harris brought a Harvard-trained economist to tell them why they were wrong. That doesn't speak to people. We're the neoliberal response that we've had to the right, and part of why we keep tacking to the right, they're protecting the same power the right is, but they're not speaking to the visceral pain that people are experiencing. They're not saying, I see you, you can't put food on your table, and this is how I want to help you do that, or how we could build better safety nets or social systems so that you can. And so we have a candidate that is saying, well, if we get rid of those people, there'll be more for you. And a candidate that's saying, well, have you considered this economic system actually, like, we don't have anyone on the left that wants revolutionary change saying this revolutionary change would put food on your table because I want you to have food on your table, because we collectively need everyone to have food on their table. And I think that that's part of why, from just a psychological standpoint, people will vote against their own interests because one person is speaking to the pain they're expressing, and one candidate is sort of pretending it doesn't exist because it's uncomfortable for them. So that's my read a little bit on it. But I also think that this has been many years in the making. You know, I can't remember the book that I had read, but there was a quote that really stood out to me, and that was that the right is not winning a war of policy, they're winning a war of messaging.
Thank you. Julianne, do you want to respond also?
Yeah, sure.
Question?
Yeah, I'm always very skeptical of like post-election like narratives that try to like isolate one thing or the other as to like why the election goes a certain way. I think a lot of times just speaking about like maybe minorities, I think there's a little bit of a like pulling up the ladder or crabs in the bucket type mentality in a way. So that might be why like you see black men maybe voting a little bit more. And again, these numbers, these narratives, I don't think are necessarily hard and true. Like I think people vote ultimately maybe less about the politics of their personal situation, but more about their personal interactions with people around them. So if you have the feeling that you're culturally different from maybe somebody who likes Beyonce or is into Taylor Swift, you might just, vote the opposite way as a protest sort of vote against the hegemonic culture that you think is dominant. I don't think necessarily there's ever a real like I think people don't necessarily look at like oh there's a good option and a bad option, but maybe one option that is completely contemptible to them and one option that is slightly more palatable. And I think ultimately there is this idea that still exists that Donald Trump is not a politician. He's not he's still an outsider. And in a way, the Republican Party did a decent enough job. They actually fought it, but they did a decent enough job at essentially when Donald Trump took over to let him take over. So now that party, the entire party is necessarily not seen as an establishment party the way that the Democrats still are viewed as such. So that might be just like one like overarching theory as to the way politics are viewed in America. And again, like Tanya said, there is no Democratic Party. There's no alternative that's actually trying to speak to people's issues. That is a true alternative attempt to alleviate their material conditions that have certainly devolved over the last 70 years as the American middle class has. And I think ultimately people don't have class politics in America. The politicians don't speak about working class; they speak about middle class. So therefore, a lot of people maybe see themselves as middle class when they're really working class people, and that allows them to sort of reject what they view as maybe upper class politics that comes from the Democratic Party. But again, it's not like the Democratic Party is really an alternative. So there's always that underlying issue because Michael said, capital owners have two parties, and the workers don't have any. So, and I also think on one thing that's important to just notice that there seems to be a theme of this happening in all sort of Western countries, happening in Germany, happening in the United Kingdom, and it tracks so closely across the board with like Labor and the Democratic Party or the SPD/Union in Germany. In France, I think they have a little bit more of a leftist political establishment that exists that people do vote for and consistently is a political player. But I think people should just note that this is not America's never unique in that regard, and that like there is a lot to learn looking at how similar our situation is across the Atlantic or in Canada even. I know Donald Trump actually may have done the Conservative Party a rotten favor with his mouth opening his mouth, but that's not the case necessarily in Europe and Germany. So like this is a different context. But again, just to always look at other political contexts for similarities and lessons that can hopefully be learned.
If I could just offer one other perspective. The United States, students in the United States have $2 trillion worth of debt. Right?
Oh, yeah.
The average student will graduate with a BA with a debt load of $30,000. That just seems $30,000 US dollars, and they're not Canadian, 40,000 Canadian. Anyway, that's the average throughout the United States. To go to medical school, $300,000. You wonder why doctors go private and don't work for the state, right? Lawyers, same thing for many of them too. There's no movement. You know, there are people that talk about this, but this is $2 trillion a year. The debt service alone that goes to the banking system and to the US government is $150 billion a year, just the interest on that. You know, so there's no movement around this except a handful of people again. You know, this represents double the defense, at least on the surface, the Defense Department budget too. And this is another thing we're not really speaking to today. You know, despite the Russian military that we're witnessing today and what kind of arsenal, you know, Putin has put together, etc. The United States is a warfare state. Yeah, this is really part of the problem. This has gone on since 1938. You know, the New Deal did not get us out of the Depression. The warfare state did, and everything is built on a wartime economy. You know, this is another thing about the Democrats. Joe Biden, rightfully so, was called the party of war, the war machine at work. You know, and Trump knew this, and he comes in and says, "I'm going to fix Ukraine. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to fix that." But nothing's happening, as we know, right? Again, so unless we look at this from the standpoint again of the power of what used to be called the military industrial complex, which is now technological, medical, et cetera. You know, in a way, we're missing again part of the problem too. And it's a very deep thing how people go against their own interests. It's a very goes back to, you know, those of you that are French here, la beauté, voluntary servitude. You know, Montaigne's good friend back in the 15th, 16th century. Yeah.
I do just want to quickly add, and I think it's a critical piece of the electoral analysis, is actually more people didn't vote than voted for either candidate. And I certainly know that when I go out and I knock doors in affordable housing neighborhoods, most of those people don't vote. So a lot of the most disenfranchised people in the United States look at both options and say, neither of those are for me. I'm just not going to take part.
Yeah, we'll vote.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. I see a question here, Victor. Do you have question?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And after Mario. Ah oui, et monsieur.
Hi, well, thank you so much for coming. It's great to see you in person. And Michael, I've also read a few of your pieces, so it's fun to hear you and hear someone.
Parle un petit peu plus fort parce que derrière, je pense qu'il t'entend.
And hear someone cite Gramsci in their introduction. So it's always fun. We're talking about like creating communities, putting bread on the table. I think one big part of the problem is those communities exist. We're just not into them. So my question would be like, what relationship would you like to see between a socialist movements and religious groups, especially in the United States? Especially since the far right have their grasp, especially on Christians, but also a bunch of other religious groups. So relationships between socialists and the religious groups existing in the United States.
Thank you. Well, I can take your question also, and after Mario. You have a question? Can you
Yeah. So I know early on you were both making references to like international coordination among the radical right. And that immediately makes me start thinking of like Stephen Harper and the IDU, or Narendra Modi and the NXT conclave, which in turn gets into the BJP, Fidesz, Likud, etc. What would you think in the Canadian context in the wake of the annexation threat of the left using authoritarian methods to suppress their actions here in Canada? Like, for instance, banning US-based Christian nationalist sects and their Canadian affiliates, like prescribing them as terrorist organization, blacklisting anybody who ties to the IDU, Fidesz, Likud, or the BJP from Canadian politics, maybe re-educating people who advocate for US annexation and forcibly annexing Hampstead into Montreal to deny a platform to Jeremy Levi and his allies. Do you think those sort of authoritarian methods would be productive for the left to consider as we gain influence?
Okay.
Going first to the question about religion and the left. Part of the problem again with the left is, yes, it missed the whole vote on religion. I mean, liberation theology obviously was a very productive movement in the global South, Latin and South America, and had some very good adherence. And we have very progressive people. I'm friends with Cornel West, for example, who still is out there with prophetic justice, and he's a religious. He speaks about the spiritual power, radicals for the spiritual power, in a sense. How to integrate that is another very difficult story, because most religious organizations still, are built on, well, most people on the left, or at least people on the left who have studied this through Freud, Marx, many Feuerbach, etc. That somehow this is an illusion, right? Going forward, right? What of the religious, left do we retain? How do we do this? And of course, in the Black churches and the civil rights movement, and even including the Black Power movements, were very integral. So I hear your question. For example, I live a block away from what's Lafayette Avenue Presbyterian Church, which was the place of, for Underground Railroad, and also has been very active on the left. This is where Frederick Douglass wrote the Emancipation Proclamation, the first draft, etc. So these were progressive people. You find this, but most churches, most people of the religious right are not really thinking progressive. And to get into that structure is another problem. And then the question is, how do we really reach these people? It's a very, very tough sell. And part of right wing, Joe Rogan has 30 million listeners. I don't know if you know this, 30 million people on the podcast. But anyway, 30 million listeners here. And a lot of these people, you're talking about alpha males, you're talking about, religious right, a whole group of people. This is pretty amazing when you begin to think about the belief of this. Before that, Rush Limbaugh, before that, so you have these airways that are playing to these people as well. So I don't know what, there are very few Cornell Wests in the Union Theological Seminary, or David Dyson, who was Susan Chavez's bodyguard, who was the priest of the Lafayette Presbyterian Church. So this is a very difficult, again, question. And speaking of leaving the Christian right, they're dangerous. Yes, some of them are very dangerous. Other people of the Christian right are just totally ignorant, right? They're not bad people. They're just totally ignorant in a sense. And I said the phrase that they use in Queens a lot, you can't fix stupid, right? In a sense, the question is, how do you speak to these people, at a certain level? So again, very, very good questions in terms of how do you build this political organization around this. But yeah, again, I'm not knocking on doors like my colleague.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to recognize that most religion, though not all religion, is still built on a structure of charity, not necessarily collective liberation. And I have worked with depending on the religious entity, I've worked with plenty in Vermont. We have an organization, actually, Vermont Interfaith Action, which is a group of religious networks that really show up to fight for things like keeping people housed instead of unhoused, putting them into unsheltered homelessness. They were really critical in Vermont passing our overdose prevention center legislation. So I think it's really critically important that we work with everyone. And I think we also need to be thinking about how we infiltrate that vacuum of ideas that have brainwashed people in the religious right and really in the working class to buy into authoritarianism. I mean, Americans are some of the most propagandized people in the world. And I think it's really critical that we recognize that and we learn to speak to that. But yes, I think we absolutely should be working with anyone who wants to come to the table and work with us, including religious organizations. And I think, but when I think of sort of the more mainstream US religious organizations, it is about, it's not about lifting everyone up so that there are no poor, it's about caring for the poor. And so I think it's also figuring out how do we navigate that. And some of my close socialist friends are religious. There was a former pastor of the Methodist church in the town that I live in who is also a DSA member, and unfortunately moved to Massachusetts, but but I think we have to build those cross-cultural, cross-ideological connections and really recognize where we're fighting for the same thing. And I also think sometimes that education, and I am not someone who grew up in any type of religious tradition, but that doesn't mean I can't connect with people and work with people. But I also think it's how we learn how to break into the very real movement that has been across the United States. And actually, if you look back a couple of decades, has been orchestrated in large part by Russia, but the Christo-fascist movement is very real, very dangerous. And if the tools at our disposal to push back against that are organizing religious entities to join us that want to fight for something different, then yes, by all means, we should be doing that.
Thank you. Julianne, do you want to add something about that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Really quickly, I think from my perspective, I think the first thing is going to be whatever whatever like sort of organization we're talking about, religious organization, their parishioners, they need to be offered something like fundamentally different. So like again, just that going back to like the previous question, I think ultimately if you know if we're talking about the Democratic Party, I don't think the Democratic Party has any shot at doing it like as a party. What you might see is like smaller local organizations and local politicians that might be able to personally make inroads with religious leaders in different communities, and that might be a way to sort of trickle down to their parishioners in a way. But I think what fundamentally has to happen is they need to be offered something that is going to make a material change to their lives, and I don't think they're going to get that from the right. They're always going to be offered sort of false promises when it comes to the right, and things that are not actual red herrings, things that are not actually going to change their lives. So if they have a true option that presents itself as a life-changing political option that they think is viable, I think that's the first step. And when it comes to like the question about like authoritarian like tactics to sort of quash right political movements and sort of Christo-fascism. I think ultimately that can be done, and I think it can be done at like the tax level, looking at taxes of mega churches. I think there's a lot there that goes on that, and I don't have any evidence of this. I'm just assuming that churches and that are deemed nonprofits that are actually building gigantic facilities and compounds around the American Midwest and South. I think there's definitely something there that could be looked at, and again, I think tools like cracking down on corruption in churches and scandals in churches is just one way to actually bring down organizations that are religious that are doing anti-moral things. So that's just my 2 cents on it, but yeah.
Thank you. For the conclusion, we can take 2 more questions quickly. And
By the way, I'm for lifelong learning path for those people you said. We should be authoritarian.
Yeah.
They should go to the camp. Right, we re-educate the cats, so this would be much more fruitful than arresting them, and yeah, we know how to torture for, the next, yeah, if need be.
Just
Yeah.
Thank
The
you.
ancient Greek lesson of thing, pedagogy meant all sorts of torture.
Yeah, 8 years ago, I was scammed by a traumatized alt-right sociopath, so
Right.
I don't think who had previously been a convict, so I don't think traumatizing those people is going to help very much. Just made our community.
I don't think we're gonna solve oppression by using the tools of our oppressors.
okay, we have 2 ultimate questions quickly. Mario, and you are not.
Why do you don't plan do the political movements like Latin Americans, others politicals, others that the Democrats or Republicans, why you cannot do another movement that can win the power?
Can you
Yeah, I think he's asking, why don't we have alternative political movements in the
Yeah.
United States? That
And-
absorb, of course, right?
just that yeah.
Violence and all access to this.
Yeah, justice for all.
Hi, everybody. Theo, he, him pronouns, Theo Whelan from Vermont. I'm a member of DSA, big supporter of Tanya. All 3 of you today have talked about the need for a socialist party, a labor party, a working class party in America, and that the Democrats don't represent that. We have the consensus on that. What are features of the party that you're looking to construct? And specifically, throughout the last 200 years, we've seen a lot of different socialist programs or labor party programs. How best do we put that program together? Bernie Sanders just kind of declared a program and it was somewhat popular. But also, what is the politician's relationship to that program? So, yeah, talking about party building and program in particular.
Thank you. Now, if you can answer to that question, and also thank the closer.
So there are certainly two related questions. I'm going to start with the latter one, and the answer is I don't really know how we build that, particularly, and now I'm going to get to your question, within the structure that we have in the United States. It is intentionally structured to maintain the power of just the two parties. There are ballot access issues where candidates can't get on the ballot in every state. There are campaign finance problems that make it very difficult for candidates to run outside of that mainline structure. So Vermont does have a third party that is the most successful third party in the country, but I don't know that I would look at that as being wildly successful. And it's really difficult. As you know, I run with the Progressive Party, and we've seen losses in the past few years, and some of the challenges, what I would want to see in the party that I would be in, is one of the things that the Progressive Party holds dear is we don't take corporate money. And that puts us at an immediate disadvantage against the Democrats and the Republicans, because they do, which means I mean, in my last election cycle, the Democrat that ran against me outspent me 8-1. And so we're at an immediate disadvantage because of the structure that we've created, which doesn't mean I don't think we need to do it and figure it out and figure out what our values and our morals are and how we move forward in a way that upholds that. But I don't know if we can do it in time. And so I think we need to be thinking alternatively outside as to, you know, how do we run more independent candidates? How do we do things outside that structure to break it down? But there's also, going back to my previous question, my previous statement about propaganda. Every time a third party candidate runs, what I hear is, oh, I love them, but I can't vote for them because so-and-so that I don't like will win. But if every person that loved that person just didn't buy into that, like, oh, they're not a major party candidate, so I can't vote for them, they might win. But I also think we need to look at structural electoral reform, things like ranked choice voting or instant runoff voting that allows people to vote for the candidate they most like without being afraid that the candidate they don't like will win if their candidate doesn't make it across the finish line. And frankly, I think the Citizens United decision was one of the most damaging to democracy decisions I've seen in my lifetime, and possibly beyond that. And that was the decision in our US Supreme Court that said corporations are people too, and money is speech, which means that corporations can funnel unlimited money into political campaigns. They essentially can buy political seats. Those seats that are in our US Congress and in every state legislature across the country are bought and paid for by the highest bidder. And until we fix that, we are never going to have the things that we need, because the highest bidder is pharma. It's the medical industrial complex. It's the war machine. So why would those people who have been paid to be there by those people ever fight for the policies that we everyday people need? And so I think we also need to be pushing against that, to open up the ability for third parties or independent candidates or candidates that reject that type of money to be successful. I am the only progressive senator in our 30-member Senate, and we have, I believe, 3 progressive House representatives in our 150-member House. And so there's real structural challenges to building that sort of alternative to the Democrats and the Republicans. Should we do it? Yes. But we're going to have to like overturn US Supreme Court decisions to get there. So I think we also have to be thinking outside of that box to how we do other things in the meantime.
But Kennedy tried to do it. Kennedy tried to create an independent. What's your position? I really think he created a lot of hope in the generation. I spent the last winter in Massachusetts. I really think some hope. He tried to build that thoughts. So what's your position, Kennedy?
Of Robert Kennedy Jr.?
Yeah.
Well, he certainly has some spaces, like, you know, some of the things that he says around the food system in the United States being poisoned are accurate, but he's also incredibly dangerous in terms of his stance on healthcare and science. And, you know, so he's also incredibly wealthy himself. And so if he can self-fund his own campaign in another lane, that is, again, not necessarily meaning he's going to be fighting for the working class individuals or the people who need access to vaccinations or the people who need access to condoms so they don't, end up with HIV. Like, he's incredibly dangerous. And I don't think that what we want is to build an alternative that is simply self-funded by wealthy people. So yes, and a lot of the people that I know, I'm the only renter in the Vermont Senate. I'm not self-funding a campaign or a political party, which also means that the things I'm fighting for, when my colleagues who are largely landlords and wealthy university professors, when they at the end of the day are like, yeah, that's the right thing to do, but I'm sick of fighting for it, so let's try again next year. I'm fighting for my own liberation and rights. So the fight for me is much different. So I think we have, that sort of goes to the previous question about making sure that as we're building something, we're grounding it in our collective values and morals, and not just to get there.
She said it very well. I mean, number one, I can back up even before Reagan. The Democratic Party completely came apart in 1968, never recovered from the disaster of the 1968 election. Going back to that. And since then, there have been, certain moments on the horizon of a possible alternative. Most of them just faded out, right? In a way. The Communist Party USA, got a few votes. Angela Davis, probably most of you know, and know of, ran for vice president with Gus Hall. That was one possible, representative party of working class people who had the line, et cetera. I'm not saying that I'm an advocate for their dogmatic positions on a lot of things. I think, it may be time for us to start thinking through, there's a Russian thinker named Anatoly Fursov, who says, part of the problem with the left in the world is it doesn't want to try to, bring in those people in the ruling class, to give some support. And I would not bring in Robert Kennedy Jr. This would not be the people I would go after. But in a sense, this is something that really needs to be taken into account. I've studied, Soviet history very accurately. The person that always could get into the Kremlin was Arnold Armenhauer. There was no bigger capitalist in the world. But because he delivered medical supplies through his family's pharmaceutical company, after the Bolshevik Revolution, when Russia was in deep need of medical, he always had access, right, in a sense. So this was somebody, that in a way, still had, something going, with an alternative. Not that the Soviet Union became an alternative. To me, it was the beginning of an alternative that went awry, obviously, in many moments. So I think this is something we really have to think about going forward, because, she's an anomaly. Most people that go up against 8-to-1, odds in terms of financing don't have a chance in the world. We lost Bowman in New York. We've lost a lot of people in these elections. Also AIPAC is very powerful in terms of determining elections around the country right now. If you even hint at pro-Palestinian, you're talking about millions of dollars that are going to go against you in elections. So I think now we have to start thinking about some combinations out there, in a sense, that happen. If different in a way, yes, campaigns. And to my mind, Bernie Sanders, to go back to Vermont here for a second, they had an opportunity. I talked to Cornell about this. I talked to Adolph Reed, Josh, we went to a party for Cornell's presidential campaign on the Upper West Side. Bernie Sanders had a war chest of $80 to $90 million. They could have created an alternative. They really should have done that. Even if it was an independent party, to go back to what you said, they had a war chest. They had an ability. They had people behind them, in a sense, but they didn't do it. That has to make you take a step back and say, what the hell's going on with alternative rhetoric? When push comes to shove, when it's time to really walk the walk, instead of just talk the talk, there was a capitulation to the system completely, in a sense. And this was the last hope, if you will, of, the democratic socialist left, if you will, in some ways, and going on. It needs to be critiqued. Why didn't that happen? And yes, the result would have been Donald Trump would have been elected again, maybe. We don't know, instead of Biden. But Sanders would have had probably 20 to 25% of the electorate, plus a political party, if you want to call it independent or whatever, that would have been viable in this election now. So I think these are the kind of things we need to learn from. We need to learn from these, yeah. I mean, Walter Benjamin once said, we must have hope for those without hope. And that seems to be also something that goes along with Gramsci's great phrase of the optimism of the will, in a sense. But we have to learn from these things and we have to talk to these people, about this, And what happened to our revolution? We had one of our good, I don't know if you know Heather Godney, but she's one of our friends and, top comrades over the years. What happened to this, right? In a sense, what has really happened? And, and you have to also ask, who goes against US foreign policy, no matter what ilk they're of right now, too? This is another thing. So to go back to, a Pedro is not possible here, that's in Colombia. A Claudia Sheinbaum is not possible in the United States in a sense, right? Lula is not possible, right? We go on, Morales, etc. But, we bought Linera Garcia to the left forum many years ago. He came, from Bolivia, right? In a sense, these people in the United States will never get close to K Street. We call it K Street because that's where the policy decisions are made. That's where the lobbying is on. That's who protects the pharmaceutical industry, the defense industry, et cetera, et cetera. So again, yeah. So I don't mean to be on a sour note here, but I'm for the global South. I'm for, as a new moment here, that we have much to learn from the global South. In a way, the United States teaches us time and time again, we're in this repetitious moment. I know it's the belly of the beast that we live in. It's the dominant hegemon still, but slowly losing the hegemony too. But yeah, I really hear the voices there. What's coming out of the global South.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. On a hopeful note.
And thank you. Now, Julian, can you ask to the two questions we have, and also you have the conclusion one.
Yeah, very very briefly, I think just one thing that my analysis is showing me is that it seems like the far right it's always something new. It's a new party, whether that be Nigel Farage with UKIP and now Reform. It's not the Tories it's not the center right party that they're reforming and then offering to people, but they're breaking from the center and starting something anew. I don't know if that's possible in the United States, but I do think the closest thing that might be possible is just at this point maybe extracting some 8% of what would be a normally consistent Democratic base. What organization is best suited to do that? My personal opinion would be DSA, but then I think there would need to be some sort of takeover within DSA to sort of change their orientation towards the Democratic Party in some way. But I think that's the only way at this point to sort of extract any sort of negotiating leverage is to sort of pull out some chunk of that Democratic base. And I think there's enough people who are really disappointed with the Democratic Party for that to actually happen. Now, I just don't see that being like earnestly discussed and actually strategized and theorized as a possibility. But it seems to me that's the lowest hanging fruit, easiest way to sort of begin some sort of alternative search is to just sort of segment away from what we are currently doing, which is this consistent two-party system in which everybody at the end of the day rallies behind their side no matter what, because of some deep fear that the other side is this is the most important election, and if we lose this, we'll never have a chance again to take any sort of power. But I think ultimately it might be prudent to take that power out and negotiate with it. And if there's not enough concessions made, then to say that earnestly that the left is sitting home this year in this election, even if it is the most important one, that might be the only way to actually create the conditions for change in the future. So.
Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you, Michael, Tanya, Julian.
Thank you.
Thank you also to you
Thank you.
for the patience with what?
And don't get fooled by Ibrahim Tagori's authoritarianism. He knows what he's up against in Burkina Faso. Yeah. This is a.
OK.
Yeah.
L'activité a été organisée par le journal des alternatives, un média alternatif indépendant en fait avec alternative, avec sa propre activité. Et on a lancé une campagne de financement qu'on termine avec demain. Alors, au bénéfice, dans la tête, vous avez quelques deniers de disponibles. On solde les belles caricatures montées à 20 pièce.
And
Et
they
on
are
a
sold
les rouleaux à 10 si vous êtes intéressé. Okay. Et si vous voulez, je vais vous donner un petit pamphlet. Vous avez un code QR ici, OK? Et vous pouvez contribuer à la campagne de fonds directement avec le code QR. C'est la façon aussi d'aider pour que l'activité se fasse aujourd'hui. Alors, en anglais, just shortly, even if you are a foreigner, there's no problem to pay with a credit card for our.
You take Trump money.
Thank you for all of you and for the patience because they have technical problems. And also, if you want to come with some of us, we are going to chat at the Bego restaurant. It's 2 blocks from here. If you...
Formerly Comasol. Comasol.
Yes, it's like the Comasol. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Here.
One far back. We have gone all the way back.
Well, that's, you know, it's
Besoin d'aide? Oui.